Hi there. Welcome to Bible Slash Chat. Kevin, hello.
Hello.
We're about to step on a landmine.
Yeah.
This should be great. We thought it would be
go
helpful.
first.
We thought it would be helpful to address a topic that obviously is very sensitive. So we want to be super cautious even as we talk about it. And that at certain points we might even come to like slightly different conclusions. But the reason we want to talk about it is a lot in the news, at least in our circles. And the issue is the issue of Alistair Begg and some of the stuff that he said about a transgender wedding in an interview recently. And so what I'm going to do, maybe like we could start with just the discussion of what he said and then how we would address that.
Yeah. So first, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
You know, like hindsight's 2020. I'm really grateful to be the guy looking back.
Yeah,
you know?
same. Yeah.
Because either anyone in that position's in a hard spot.
Totally.
But what Alistair Begg was asked in a Q&A by an older lady, a grandmother who had a transgender grandson, he was asked, should I, basically like, what do I do? Do I attend the wedding? I'm invited. What do I do?
Yeah.
And his line of reasoning was basically saying, do they know, like, you're a Christian, that you don't approve of this?
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, like that you don't countenance in any affirming way the choices that they're making with their life. Like, do they know that? She said, yes. And then he said, well, therefore, basically, if that's in play,
Like she's communicated it to them.
yeah, they know, the couple, you know, in the ceremony knows that she's actually in disapproval of this decision. His counsel was, well, then you can go, and you should bring a gift. You know? So it's like, okay, so then she said, oh, what? You know, she's kind of confused a little bit.
That, yeah.
And then his last comment that I read, and of course, we're just speaking to what we see on the transcript. There's more to it. He said, well, here's the thing. Your love for them may catch them off guard, but your absence will simply reinforce the fact that they said, quote, these people are what I always thought, judgmental, critical, unprepared to countenance anything,
Right.
end quote. So that's what he said. That was the whole issue. Just to kind of put that on the table now.
Yeah,
So,
that's good. Okay, so like we were talking about before we started the video here,
yeah.
he actually sees an interesting dichotomy where he would say love and absence are opposites. So you can't be absent and still love the person,
Right,
which is where we'd like maybe want to start there.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
that seems to be an unhelpful dichotomy.
Yeah. When just to read it, he said, well, here's the thing. There's two phrases coming up. The first one is, your love for them may catch them off guard. And by that, he means your presence with a CE and then your present with a T, like your gift. Your showing up and your giving of a gift may catch them off guard. The second phrase is, but your absence. So he's dichotomy between love and absence. So love is showing up and giving a gift. Absence is not doing any, like not participating in that event.
Yeah.
But in that, he's equating participation with countenancing this. Because he says, your absence will simply basically reinforce their narrative. And they said, these people are what I always thought, judgmental, critical, and unprepared to countenance anything.
Right.
Which means that if they understand that if you show up, you're countenancing what they're doing. Countenance meaning support.
Yeah.
So if you showed up, you'd be in support of this. And so that's what he's saying. That's the framework understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
So is it possible to love someone and not participate in this kind of thing? You know, that's the question.
So this is where we would definitely disagree with what Alistair Begg said. We would say that at the very best, what the counsel he gave was unwise. Because what he's actually telling them to do is countenance something, which they don't agree with. And that's where we would go to Romans 1, Romans 1:32. Although they knew the ordinance of God, and here he's talking specifically even about homosexual relationships. It says, although they knew the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. So the one thing we want to avoid at all costs is to give approval to those who are practicing certain actions. Now, Begg, I know, and because he actually says this, do they know that you don't approve? So he's making sure that that couple knows that they don't that he doesn't approve, which is helpful in one sense because like his conscience is actually being clarified with them. Like, this is wrong what you're doing.
Right.
The problem is his presence,
Right.
even in his own language, countenances
Right.
the activity. So that does give approval. So
Yeah.
there's a tacit approval, not necessarily a spoken approval, but a tacit approval, and not with the couple, but with the group that's present. So there's a sense in which the grandmother's presence or Begg's presence in that situation likely gives tacit approval to a sinful action, even though there's not that wasn't their initial intent.
Yeah, it's not in their heart, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I think it's helpful to see like your presence is a statement, you know, and so like, is what you're saying with your presence in harmony with what you would say with your mouth,
Or maybe
you know?
what you
Like,
did say with your mouth.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is there mixed messaging, or are we like fully communicating something that's honoring to the Lord?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, you can love someone and not be there.
Right.
But the hard part is like, yeah, move it around. You know, move the issue around. It's like a Mormon baptism. You
Right.
know, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, do I countenance a Mormon baptism? Of course not.
No,
You know,
yeah.
I wouldn't.
It's false.
I would not go and countenance that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so it's like similar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just
Totally.
any sin that's like part of the celebration
Yeah.
of like,
What
come
that sin is.
celebrate this thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I wouldn't do that. Now, with
So real quickly,
Yeah.
now in terms of that, so what we're saying is rather than speak disapproval and then show
yeah,
approval in a sense, speak love and then show the disapproval. Like maybe a better way to approach it. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we love you and we care for you very deeply actually, but we don't actually approve of what you're doing,
Yeah.
and therefore our attendance would be unhelpful.
right.
We'll go to the reception because they're fine or whatever. I mean, we can go to whatever, and like we can get together. You guys can come over to our house for dinner. That's great.
Let's go get lunch.
Yeah,
you know?
anything,
Yeah,
right?
I'll take
But
you out for your birthday.
Participation in the ceremony itself is in itself giving some sort of approval, which
Yeah.
then becomes very confusing and actually mixes the message that you've spoken.
Right.
Where not attending doesn't mix the message of love that you've communicated, because what you're actually saying is like, look, I love you, and what you're doing is actually unrighteous, and will ultimately result in your eternal death.
Yeah.
So I want you to see that.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. Like I think it's good to have the caution of like, I don't want to say the wrong thing to you. I don't
Yeah.
want to confuse you. You know, and I think a lot of like the criticism that he said the person might bring up is that they're what I always thought: judgmental, critical, unprepared to countenance anything.
Yeah.
And knowing part of that worldview is like their definition of love would be accept me and approve of me.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know? And it's
yeah.
like, well, no doctor operates that way.
Yeah,
you
no,
know, no
yeah.
doctor is like, well, I'm just going to follow the feelings of the patient. If they
Yeah.
feel fine,
Yeah.
I'm just going to not tell them the truth, you know, about some bigger issue. And it's like, no, a doctor loves someone enough to tell them the truth tactfully, gently, graciously, you know, all of that. But it's like just seeing that is like, well, okay, I can show kindness to this person, take them to lunch, you know, hang out with them at my house, whatever. But when approving of their sin would be part of the party,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, when
yeah.
it's baked into the event,
Yeah.
it's like, well, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
So,
Okay, so I mean, I think that's super helpful. So we would say, at very best, his counsel is maybe unwise.
Yeah.
Potentially, like maybe like a sin of ignorance in some
yeah,
sense.
yeah. If
So-
if the person has a clean conscience and they're just maybe not aware
Yeah.
of the other things
Of the
that they might be
implications,
saying,
Yeah.
you know, like with their gestures and things, it's like, well, okay, you know,
Yeah.
let's maybe call that a sin of ignorance or
Yeah,
you know,
whatever.
very
Yeah.
unwise.
Yeah, super
Yeah.
unwise. There's some place there where
Yeah.
it's not good.
It's not okay.
Yeah. So then that being said, Alistair Begg says this, like, as Christians, how should we feel toward Alistair Begg?
Yeah, this is a whole other thing, and I think it's a really good point to bring up. I
Yep.
think, well, for one, he's part of his own church. You know,
Yep.
there's a whole complexity because he's all over the world.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for one, his own church should be, his elders, his fellow elders, should be counseling him, praying with him,
Caring for him, yeah.
confronting him
Yeah.
about a lack of wisdom and these kinds of things with
Yeah.
the word, putting the word before him so that he can see what God's telling him and maybe rephrase, you know, what he would say.
Yeah.
But also for us, I mean, like Ephesians 4 says, like, strive for the unity of the Spirit and to
Yeah.
maintain the unity
Yeah.
of the Spirit and the bond of peace. It's like, we don't just want to torch him, you
Yeah.
know, and bury him. Like, I love Alistair Begg, and I wouldn't let that love paper over this issue.
Yeah.
I think I can say I love the guy. I'm thankful for his ministry. I also really don't like what he said.
Yeah.
But I read C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis says crazy stuff all the time. But it's
Yeah.
like I'm thankful to interact with him.
I mean, to be fair, like R.C. Sproul,
Yeah.
in the way that we think about like theology, his
Totally.
infant baptism is like on
Yeah.
a scale, in one sense, much greater than this, because he's denying what we think the Bible would teach about a very specific topic.
Yeah, and he's broadcast from the grave.
Yeah, and we
like,
adore him.
yeah, we read his books, and it's like
Yeah.
so we need to learn to be picky eaters and like
Yeah.
and have our palates, wise. But I think for caring for them, it's like, well, what? I think like if Philippians 2 consider the needs of others more important than your own,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what would I need if I was in his shoes? He's in a really hard spot. He's a big deal. But,
Yeah.
he's got a lot of eyes on him, and now he's got a lot of angry people at him.
Yeah.
How would I want someone to come to me and address this with me? You know, and it's like I of course hope I'd be humble and things like that, but think about like, man, it would be great if the other big voices, in the celebrity pastor world were joining the messaging of like, oh, let's hang with this guy. Let's like rescue our brother,
Totally.
and help strengthen him, just like any band of brothers. So I think that's great. I mean, and people are having their different messages and stuff, and they're going about it the way they think's right. But in light of Ephesians 4, I'd say like, man, try to maintain that rather than just, shoot our wounded.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Shoot our wounded. Yeah. And also, I mean, we were talking about this actually this morning, but I feel like as in the pastoral office, you give just constant counsel. I feel like you're always answering questions, and a lot of them are like wisdom. They're tricky, and there's like they're knotted a little bit and hard to understand. Some of them are like directly addressed in Scripture, like I would say like infant baptism.
Yeah, right.
Those kinds of issues. But then like others are not directly addressed in Scripture. It's not very like plainly obvious exactly what to do, and yet we're giving advice constantly.
Yeah.
But with someone like him, his advice is being publicized
Yes.
globally
Yeah.
all the time. Like there's almost nothing these guys can do, especially in these positions where they're not being publicly like recorded or quoted or whatever, which the pressure of that is wild, number one. And number two, of course he's going to make mistakes. He's not Jesus.
Yeah.
So like to me, I'm like, hey, he made a mistake. He wasn't wise. Should we watch for his response when he does something that isn't wise? Yeah, for sure. Like I think it's important to see how he responds to that. But again, like, man, I would hate to have everything I've ever said pastorally recorded and then all of it analyzed with a fine-tooth comb for
You have
error.
an iPhone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, careful. So I mean, I think it's helpful to like frame it in the context of like, hey, look, number one, this is. Obviously it's a hotbed issue because of what's happening culturally, but in terms of like issues that could like really hurt the church, things like egalitarianism, different views on baptism, different views on a lot of those things, I would say are actually like in many ways like substantially greater issues because the text gives us direction on that stuff. So I would say like let's die on the right hills and then like care for this guy and help him if he were to show up at our church, I want to sit down with him and talk with him. But again, like in one sense, like leave him to the care of his elders in that regard and just trust that they're going to do that. The man's got a faithful ministry. He loves Christ. He's preached the word. Like torching him for a misstep pastorally seems a little bit heavy-handed.
Like what is it, James 3? Like we all stumble in many ways,
Yeah,
and it's like
totally.
that's all of us.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see to speak well of him, you can see he's trying to guide someone through like a difficult issue.
Yeah.
He's trying to say like, don't approve of them.
Yeah, totally.
Like in his heart, he wouldn't want to approve of them.
Totally, yeah.
He just thinks, from what he sees, this is the best way forward.
Yeah.
We would say, okay, I think there might be other considerations you're not getting, and you are sending mixed messaging and whatever.
Yeah.
But like, those are important issues. But compared to man, I mean, we go back
all the other issues.
A lot of theological like huge chasms that are really important.
That we overlook.
Not to say this is not important, right?
No,
of
it
course
is important.
But just to be consistent with it, of like, okay, one is saying God is approving of, this practice that the church does that's not founded in Scripture.
Yeah.
And one is, hey, we're trying to do this and honor God and stumbling in it.
And yet be loving to people who are outside the church.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work best?
Yeah.
Like really complex issues.
Super hard.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, I know this is a long Bible/chat. Kevin, thank you so much. I appreciate your wisdom in all this. Obviously, very complex issue. This is not the final word on it. But if you have questions or other thoughts about it, feel free to contact us. You can always email us at info@faithbibleoc.org. thanks so much, and I hope it's helpful for you. I know it's a complex topic. We love Alistair Begg. We love those who are having a hard time with him as well. So we just want to be very cautious. Anyway, thanks so much, and feel free to email us.